Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. So today we're going to be taking another trip down memory lane and looking through old school RuneScape, more specifically Splitbark armor. We're going to be looking around the time when it first came out and how it completely took RuneScape by storm, becoming the best in-slot mage bonus armor for everyone playing. Due to its strength and hype, it was also very hard to obtain, only being a rare drop that was both convoluted and complex to get. It was a process a player had to go through within the Shades of Mordor minigame, which at the time was not even doable alone. It was a very extremely hard and challenging process, as it was very high level content, on par with some of the strongest monsters in the entire game. This not only made it super challenging, but more often than not, many players needed to seek additional help from others to even stand a chance, and getting through the minigame was a pain in the ass sometimes. Most people would have to actually jump on a special server, which everyone else would go and surround around the minigame just to help one another get through it. Like we just talked about, the actual process to actually complete the quest was very complex, especially if you consider something like Mystic Armor, which can be bought straight out if a player really wanted to do so. This just made Splitbark armor all that much harder to get because it was on its own. It was something you had to work hard for. Besides barely being possible alone, it was really quite the struggle, with a combat level of over 80 as a recommended and nearly 15 other things also being recommended, including coins, levels, items, and much more. It was a quest that you really needed to be prepared for. After all the hard work, all the grinding, and finally getting to the recommended stats, you'll jump into the quest in hopes to finally conquer it. However, once you do and all your hard work has been put into effort, it's just in order to build up some points, which then in turn allowed you to make sacred logs. If that wasn't enough, then players would have to kill and burn shades, collect the keys to kill higher level shades, burn those, and eventually, finally, after all that hard work, get a very small chance to drop a single piece of the armor. And if that wasn't enough, a freaking regant is used to craft it, in which you had to collect 11 pieces of fine cloth, 11 bark, and 77,000 coins for the full set of Splitbark armor. Remember that Shades of Mordor minigame has since received a lot of quality of life updates that made it way easier throughout the years compared to before. Also keep in mind that the minigame also includes requirements for fire making and getting magic logs, in which certainly is not easy, especially if you think about accomplishing it back in 2004, because it was a lot harder and a lot more harsh grinding times. No matter how you try to cut it or phrase it, it was very simply a slow and long grind for only a small chance at getting what you need to eventually then obtain the Splitbark armor. There's also very little a player could even do to speed up the process, because higher level chests were also locked behind higher skill requirements, so regardless of the route that the player wanted to take to obtain the precious armor, they had to be ready to really put in the time to grind. I'd also like to mention that Mystics, and for the most part all other magic equipment, did not exist in the game. Mystics was released in 2005 alongside the Slayer skill and Magic Guild, so for something like Mystic to end up being bought outright even though it was released after Splitbark really goes to show just how much harder it was to obtain things back in the day. Besides being a huge time investment for players who really wanted Splitbark armor, it also was essential for every player who enjoyed their mage playstyle, because it was a massive leap in power, especially if you compare it to what the second best in-slot at the time was, which is the blue wizard robes. Alongside the blue wizard robes, they would also wear the Zamorak monk bottom, but either way, they weren't exactly very powerful pieces of armor, and they were even just the basic armor, but they were the best it got back then. Considering that they are very basic armor, it created much to be desired for mages, especially trying to PK or just stand up in their effectiveness compared to other players. When Splitbark was added, it really gave mages a chance. It filled a huge gap, making their combat options viable at the time. The bonuses before Splitbark were atrocious and had no defenses at all. The Splitbark release was a staple release, and it actually had its effects for a long while, as the Farseer helmet, a piece of the Mystic, and a single piece of Splitbark was actually used together just to have the melee defenses. It was popular and an iconic outfit for mages PKing back in the day. It's easy to see the hype and the spike in power back in the day. Considering basic armor was the best it got for mages, added a lot for them to want. A new set made an entire class viable and was no small feat in not only RuneScape but any game in general. I mean, there was nearly a 1000% difference between Blue Wizard set and Splitbark just for magic defense bonus alone. That's not even including another 700% difference for the magic attack bonus. But what really made Splitbark special, and kind of still does make it very special to this day, is the other defense bonuses it provides. Mages had absolutely zero other defenses. I mean nothing. Zero. This was the biggest reason in which made them horrendous in PvP combat. Splitbark came in at the time and gave them a whopping 74 defense in stab, 59 in slash, and 86 in crush. These stats really brought them back into the picture with a much higher fighting chance against other players. If we really wanted to put those numbers in perspective, we could very easily because they were originally 0. This meant the simple fact that any sort of stab, slash, or crush attack would hit the player every time no matter what. I mean, a literal 100% hit chance is not a very reliable piece of armor for any sort of combat. However, when Splitbark came out, the numbers were exponentially increased, and now player stats had a chance to defend themselves. There was a chance that the opponent could miss their attack, or in other words, hit a 0 during combat. This is what allowed mages to become viable in RuneScape and really made Splitbark so significant. Man, I mean, just imagine the satisfaction of being a mage at the time. Following the playstyle that you really loved, but being hindered by the limits of the game itself was definitely frustrating. But then out of nowhere came Splitbark armor with huge improvements, creating this mass hype quickly. But then suddenly it was locked behind such a difficult wall to get past. This concept itself is actually probably what made it so special, and regardless of how tough it was to obtain, it was made so damn satisfying to finally get. Imagine barely being able to stand a chance, and then finally, after days and days, even weeks or maybe months of grinding, you finally get that sweet armor and just go completely start kicking ass. It's those awesome moments and adventures that really hook us into the games such as RuneScape, and the story of the Splitbark will always be remembered by a lot of us. I do think, however, what's most interesting and maybe just a little bit sad is how Splitbark in itself is not very much used today, and it's not in the best type of spot, which, I mean, it's a little bit sad to think about. The reason for that is because it was really something hard to get, and it was something special, something that caused an adventure, caused grinding, caused hours and hours and weeks of work to obtain, and it also just made an entire class, an entire playstyle, a lot of players viable again. I mean, if you have Splitbark to this day and you're still playing old school RuneScape and you went through all that and you remember how it put you back in the game and now it's just sitting there in your inventory, kind of outdated and not with too much of a use case, it's a little bit sad. On top of that, its value is not exactly very high and it didn't retain its awesome nature as it did back in the day like other items do until now. I mean, there's certain OP items that they just stay OP no matter if something better is released behind it. However, with the case of Splitbark, it was kind of overtaken with Mystic that came out not too much after. I mean, Splitbark still had its use case, but it became a lot more niche very quickly. It's not necessarily a bad thing because it put mages back into the playing field, and when Mystic came out, it further placed them up ahead, and it kept going with more and more items, which is great because they got the love they deserve. The last thing I think I'd like to mention is just something special and something maybe Jagex should take a point of exactly how difficult it was to get this armor, and the type of grinding needed was of course very extensive. However, if we look at it now, it's so nostalgic, it's so fun, it's a memory we love to look at. Sometimes I think this just goes to show that making things easier or less grindy isn't always the best. For example, if we look at the fact that back then you really couldn't do this alone. You couldn't do the Morton minigame alone, you needed someone else. That's something special. Even if you didn't have friends who played RuneScape, you would have to find a partner, you'd have to interact, you'd have to have an adventure together. This was a design that really pushed you to problem solve, and this goes beyond the example of just being forced to go interact and make friends just to beat a minigame, it goes to show that making a challenge or placing a challenge isn't always a bad thing. It forces us to problem solve, forces us to have an adventure, forces us to really focus on what we want to accomplish, and it gives a lot of meaning to just a video game, and that's an awesome thing. While quality of life improvements are always welcomed, and I think they will always actually improve the game and balance it in a way that's always more fun, challenge is a key thing that should always remain. Anyways, to conclude the off-topic rambling, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you like, then don't hesitate to hit that like button and always just let us know how and what we could improve in the future. I'm always looking for your feedback and ways to improve our content to hopefully bring you guys the best videos possible. As always, thank you for watching, subscribe for more content, and I'll catch you guys later.